Broadcasting live from the offices of policebackground.net. This is the Police Applicant Podcast with your host, Ken Roybal.
Hey, everybody. It's another episode of the Police Applicant Podcast with your host, Ken Roybal. That's me. And I just want to welcome Christine. The reason I'm doing that, Christine, part 2, is because I failed to remember what episode this is. So quickly, as Christine,
it's Christine part 2
takes it away.
It only took me 5 minutes to figure out that my screen was mirrored because I was pointing at you and then had to figure out that it was my other.
It goes the other way. This is episode 62. 62. So the reason we brought Christine back, of course, is because we didn't get to finish everything in part 1. We ran out of time, actually. So we're going to do this. Also, I should mention that Minerva had scheduled to be here, and then Christine had a SWAT call out. She had an emergency SWAT call out. Yeah. Being the commander of SWAT, she had to reschedule her. What are you making faces at me? She had to reschedule. So we're doing this at a later time. So Minerva was not able to make this. But sorry, I think we can do this because you and I, we have history of doing the podcast together. And just
once
to recap,
twice,
just to recap, in case you guys are skipping episodes, Christine and I were the originators of the Police Applicant Podcast.
How do you make a G with your hand?
OG. And so
it's backwards.
So we're familiar. We got the chit chat down and all that, but we wanted to bring you back because we wanted to find out. We didn't get any war stories last time. We need war stories, number 1. Number 2, we didn't get to find out, really go into detail about street cop versus campus police, which is important. You never know. People may. Here's a cool thing, you guys. I, Ken Roybal, just got some super fast Starlink internets. And so now I can actually put the podcast on YouTube. I can upload videos, which means that you get to see who Christine is and every goofy move she makes and every goofy move I make. We can do that now. And we can
I'm waiting for you to beam me up, Scotty, because we have Starlink now.
I got Starlink.
Yeah.
It works really good. So I'm really happy about that. So we talked to you about, was it a little over a month ago? Something like that? And,
it was, probably either beginning of April or end of March, I want to say. Yeah, a month ago. So
now when did you start the academy? What month and year was that?
October of 21.
So in October of 21, Christine sent me a Dear John letter and said, I'm breaking up with you. I can't do the podcast anymore.
It's not you, it's me.
I decided I want to be with the police department, and so I'm leaving you. So she left the podcast in October 21 to become a police officer in the state of Arizona. And obviously we've kept in touch and everything. And so I got to hear the adventures, and then we kept saying Christine's going to be on the podcast, and then 2023 came along. And finally, we got to schedule you. But by that time, you had since got out of the academy, done FTO at a city popo, and then decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to a campus PD because that's my gig. And so we want to find out a little bit about that. And you, let's find out. So when did you get out of the academy? In February, wasn't it? February 20?
Yep, February of 22.
February of 22. You went straight to FTO. I want to find out what your FTO is like because this fascinates me. Every time I talk to a cop, we talk about FTO. It's completely different for everybody. A lot of times, police officers will say, "God, I had the best FTO." Like me, I had a combination. And of course, this was 100 years ago. But my combination of FTOs they were top-notch coppers, man. They taught me some good police work, and they taught me how to survive the streets, and how to stay alive. Then there were some other ones. Man, they had too many donuts, or they were just jerks.
They taught you what you didn't want to do.
They taught me what I didn't want to do, but
Which
they were
is
really,
almost just as important as what you do want to do. You know?
but they were jerks, man. They were rude, and they were treating me like crap. And it wasn't like this tough love thing. It wasn't this, I'm going to teach you police work, and come on, and they're like testing you type thing. These guys were just dirt. They were jerks, man.
It was like, we're going to make you feel like dirt and like you're the stupidest individual on the planet.
Yeah. And it wasn't in a teaching moment. So I want to find out, you get out to patrol. And what happened? What was the FTO program like? Did you go straight to nights? Did you spend X amount of months in this shift? How did all that work?
Yeah. So the first couple weeks was like an orientation week where we basically just had to like go through policies and kind of learn the department. We read books to like students on Dr. Seuss week, which was fun.
Dr. Seuss week.
Before they like kicked us to the curb. But yes, we had a couple weeks of orientation, and then, which was kind of nice just to get used to the department. And then we jumped into, gosh, I think it was like 3 months or so, a little over 12 weeks maybe, where we jumped around from different sergeant and one FTO to another FTO. I think it was 2 weeks at a time, 2 or 3 weeks at a time. So you have like phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. And phase 1, you really just like don't even know what the hell you're doing. Like you're trying to figure out like where you're even. It's a new job too, so you're just kind of like trying to do a new job, but also figure out like what year it is and who you even are anymore. And you really don't know what to expect. I mean, like it's crazy because the first day, like they give you the radio and you're trying to listen to that and memorize like all the call signs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like totally overwhelming. Like you go home and you're just like, there's no way. There's no way. There's really no way that this is going to work. I can't, like, there's no way I can pick all this up. But it's just completely, you're overwhelmed just with so much information. And then trying to start a new job on top of that. So yeah, I had the 4 phases. And then, of course, like you work on different things each phase. But yeah, for us, it was like the FTOs, of course, have to handle like all the calls. So if there's somebody there, you're taking it. Even if you showed up like last on scene, you're taking that call, which is good because they want you to get the exposure and the experience and learn how to handle different types of calls. But yeah, it's definitely overwhelming. I think phase 2 or phase 3, I can't even tell you how many reports I caught that week. And it was like, you don't even know when you're going to catch up.
Now the phases, did they go by months, or did they go by when you were ready to go to the next phase?
I think they were like initially laid out to be, gosh, I'm trying to think now. So yeah, I think phase 1 would have been 3 weeks. And then, because it was like roughly 12 weeks, I think. So phase 1, 3 weeks, phase 2, 3 weeks, and so on and so forth.
I had to tax you with math.
Yes, you did. Thank you for that.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
You did put me on the spot. Yeah.
You did a good job because 12 is a big number.
It is. Yeah.
It's a big number. It's 2 digits.
Is 12 a prime number? What is even a prime number anymore? Is it like
now you're talking physics.
Hey, mobile shout out. Anybody remembers what a prime number is? No Googling.
So the entire FTO program was 12 weeks.
I think so, yes. And I actually got extended on my last week because I had a couple FTOs. Well, my dad passed away during that FTO program, so that was a little bit of a rough ride. So I was just kind of like a little bit of a mess for part of that. And then I got extended because of that, because I had missed a couple days. And then because I had a couple of FTOs who had vacations scheduled, like prior to knowing that they were going to be FTOing at that time. Mm-hmm. So they were out. So there was a couple days where thankfully, I was kind of like, thankfully, but not thankfully, I was kind of stuck at the department for 10 or 12 hours at a time. But that gave me some breath to be able to catch up on some of the reports. So
did you, when you first got out there, I think one of the most daunting things is talking on the radio. And of course,
you hate, like, it's kind of like right now. I hate I hate the sound of my own voice. I hate like myself on video. I will never go back and watch these live because I would never forgive myself for letting myself do this. Um, you hate you hate the sound of your own voice. And so like then it's the worst when you have like echo. So you can, like, if you have your FTO like has his radio on and you can hear yourself on his radio and you're like, oh God, it's like the most cringe thing ever. So you're already uncomfortable and then you're getting used to a new job. You don't know any of these people yet. And that goes away so quickly because you have so much bigger fish to fry that you're like, I don't care how stupid I sound on the radio anymore. But I'm very self-conscious. Like, I'm hyper aware of myself and I'm super hard on myself. So I think the biggest thing for me during FTO was, and I never got used to it, was get used to being uncomfortable and get used to feeling stupid and get used to the idea of like not knowing what the hell you're doing. And just like be comfortable in it. And that's the hardest thing, is like, you're never going to be comfortable with it, but you kind of have to just live with the fact that like, I am pond scum and I don't know what the hell I'm doing right now.
Exactly.
And that's hard. Yeah. It's confusing. And nobody expects you to know because it's unrealistic to expect you to know. It's normal. But if you're coming, especially from a job where you knew what you were doing and you're confident in what you're doing, or in your life, you're not somebody that's okay feeling like an idiot all the time, which hopefully you wouldn't be, but you're going into a situation where you really just are so uncomfortable because you have no idea what you're doing.
Did you, when it came to codes, because when you're talking on the radio, if you're talking on the radio, just like, hey, so I got a dead body over here, can you send somebody? It's not like that. It's like when you get when you're on a police radio, 10-4, 10-5, 10-6, 10-8, 10-10.
Yeah. So sometimes, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, was that kind of intimidating?
It was, but I think when you start out, you get like a list of codes, which again is confusing too, because you have the military alphabet for what they use, like Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, whatever. And then you have the police alphabet, which is like, I don't want to say like a dumbed down version, but it makes sense because they're mostly names, like Adam, Boy, Charles, whatever. Mm-hmm. So they're different in that way. And then you have to learn like the codes, which is like 10-4 is like, yeah, all good, scene's good, or code 4. Things like that. There's different codes and 10 codes. Like learning all that is definitely, you're just inundated with so much information, trying to learn the city that you're working in, the map, memorizing street names, memorizing the call signs, memorizing your coworkers' names, trying to not to crap your pants like on a daily basis. It's just, you're inundated with information, and it's not impossible, but it's definitely an uncomfortable learning curve for a while.
Yeah, when cops are in a police car, you can be in a police car for an hour and not get a call. And during that time, the radio is just, the radio keeps going, the traffic radio. And then cops can be sitting there talking to each other, laughing or whatever. And all of a sudden something keys them into the radio.
Yeah.
Does that take a minute to get used to?
Yes.
Or did you find yourself like listening to everything on the radio?
I think I was a little bit paranoid at first because it does help, because if you do have a specific call sign, if you hear that on the radio, you're kind of like, like that's me. But if you're listening, like, it probably took me over a month to be able, like, because you'll start to pick up on like Mumbles McGee, like when he comes on the radio, like nobody can understand him until you kind of talk to him in person and get to know who that is and the sound of their voice. When he comes on the radio, you'll hear and know what he's saying, but it takes you about a month. Like somebody will say, 10-4, and another guy says 10-4, and it sounds like, I'm in an ice cream cone, whatever. I'm in a freaking fight with whatever stupid. Like, it sounds completely different. It's one person saying something sounds completely different than another person saying it. So until you get used to how people sound on the radio, you have no idea what is coming through on the radio, like what people are saying. You don't know if, like, you're constantly asking your FTO, like, what did he just say? Mm-hmm. What did he, like, where do I need to go? Or did you copy that? Because I completely, like, it sounds like some people are on the radio with like mashed potatoes in their mouths. And then not even that, like, their radios will, come through with, feedback or whatever. And then you'll hear in the back of my mind, I remember hearing all the time, even now, like, hearing on the radio, dispatch will be like, 10-4 or control copies. And I'm like, there is no way on earth that you copied what that guy just said through the radio. There's no way. And you know that they're in dispatch playing playback, trying to hear, like, and decipher what he said, because there's no way. So it takes you forever to kind of recognize, not even just when people are like calling you on the radio, but getting used to having an earpiece in your ear or listening to the radio, and then also having conversations with people and not tuning out the radio. And it does, I think for the first couple weeks, it was like exhausting because your brain is constantly, but it does get normal after. And at that time, I did not believe that it was going to ever get normal, but it does.
It's kind of weird. It's like you learn a second language.
Yeah.
Because it's this mumble. Your partner's talking to you in one ear, the dispatcher's talking, another officer is talking, and it all just kind of becomes one language.
And they'll do it on purpose too. That's why you're on video.
And then when the dispatchers talk, they don't care that you're a trainee. They're gonna talk. They're not gonna talk slower because you just got there.
Well, and that's the thing too, is getting used to dispatchers too, because some dispatchers will be, have their way of giving you information. Other dispatchers you'll appreciate a lot more than others because they'll give you the information that they know you want without you having to ask for it. But you always have to remember to ask for what you need, because sometimes you'll be, and same with the sergeant, you'll be on this FTO phase with this FTO, learn the way that they want things. And I think we talked about it before. You'll have one sergeant that wants it X, Y, and Z. And so you tailor the way you write your reports and things like that to how that sergeant wants it. And then it's like almost purposeful that they'll switch you to somebody else and it's completely different. So that it's like everything is wrong. So it's just frustrating too, because you feel like you're starting to get the hang of things and then they flip you on your head, but it's all by design. It's just like the academy.
Yeah. And I like dispatchers because you have to learn their language too, because you'll hear your unit number and then they go, see the man, 35th Street, gun, code 3. Okay.
You're all going
10-4. But the thing is, for our listeners, everybody learns to do it. And so how long do you think it took you before you felt comfortable talking on the radio?
Before I felt comfortable talking on the radio and like maybe understanding other people, at least a couple months. And then sometimes you just have to get used. You have to sit in that discomfort.
Yeah. Until you learn it.
Right.
And there were some things that we did, and I don't know if they still do it or not, but we would do crime broadcasts. For instance, a robbery call. We go to the 7-Eleven. We get the information on the suspect and the description and the car, and you had to go on the radio and say, "I need the frequency for a crime broadcast." And it was this whole laundry list of things. Yeah. It wasn't this quick 10-4. Can I get that warrant or whatever? It was this on this day and date, blah blah blah, and the suspect
break for traffic,
break for traffic and stuff. And so that was one of those things where I'm positive when I first got on the radio, I'm like, hello, this is 13, and cops are generally pretty cool because they had to do the same thing, but they're still gonna make fun of you.
Yeah,
even though they did the exact same thing.
And even if they're not like trying to make you feel like crap, it's funny. It's just funny. So it's hard to not find humor in it, but it just sucks when you're the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
And then it, so you're beating yourself up, and then you're getting teased, and you're like, I'm done. You're like, I'm done with this. I'm over it.
And you do it to the new boots because you had it done to you. It's kind of a rite of passage. I think a lot of times they think it's what's that word I'm looking for? Hazing. And I don't look at it as hazing. I look at it as a rite of passage. Everybody, before they make fun of you because you're stupid and you sound stupid on the radio. And at the end of it all, when you make probation, they go, "All right, good job, welcome, come on in."
Yeah,
like that.
And then and you're one of the others.
Yeah, and if you're going to be a crybaby, in police work, then you're going to fold when it comes to, if that's going to make you fold, you're going to fold when it gets really bad. You're hearing
it from somebody else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the best things for people to be, well, obviously take yourself seriously. Like don't I guess don't undersell yourself or undercut yourself, but at the same time, like don't take yourself too seriously. Like be humble and be able to laugh at yourself, because if you can't, just like the amount of times you just have to kind of like smile and shake your head and you're just thinking like, screw this, man. Like that's just like, oh my God, this sucks. I feel like a freaking idiot. And you just have to sit in it. You just marinate in it. It's definitely, it makes me itch thinking about it.
And when you're in the academy, and I don't know how many classes were following you in the academy, but when you're the graduating class, you're the top dog, and all the underclassmen that are following you, they're like, oh my gosh, look at them, they're gonna graduate. Hi,
And
sir. Hi, man.
and you're like, stop calling me that. I don't know my ass from a hole in the ground.
And then you get to patrol.
Yeah.
You have your big graduation day. Take a picture of me. Here's the chief. And oh my gosh.
And then you're dog shit like day one of the academy all over again.
And then when you get to patrol, all of a sudden you're nobody. You are seriously, there's nobody, and then there's you.
It's a roller coaster.
Yeah. And that's the way it is on patrol, because there's a lot of things to learn. And I don't think it's I mean, it can seem daunting to a certain extent, but I mean, is there any way that you would everything that when I got out of the academy, everything was on paper. There wasn't, I couldn't look anything up on the computer, Google. There was no police applicant podcast, obviously, for me to kind of get some tips and hints how to do it. Would you say that, that when you get out of the academy, there's certain things you can, like, can you study the codes? Can you, are there videos you can watch? Is there anything where you could prep yourself for patrol?
Do ride-alongs. And I know it's hard now. Like people you could listen to like police radios, but
oh yeah.
And so now it's kind of, because you can kind of pick up, but it's hard when you're not in it, because you're far enough detached that you're just kind of like a listener, you know. Because I would try to listen to radios, but a lot of them are encrypted now for good reason, which is good. But if there's any kind of like police radio you could listen to, or try to memorize the 10 codes from your department before you get on, or if you're not familiar with the city you're working in, to like try to memorize those maps or common cross streets where you kind of know the areas of things, because that was hard, because a lot of that stuff you have to learn on the job, like your coworkers' names and your call signs and all those things. But if you can knock some of that stuff out beforehand, that would be good. Like if you just tack on like 10 codes with your study guides through the academy or whatever for each weekly test or whatever. Or Quizlet is cool. They have flashcards and stuff like that. You can make flashcards to quiz yourself on stuff like that. That way you have your phone and you can do it. I used to do that, but I think to a degree, it's always going to be, you know, baptism by fire a little bit. But yeah, there's definitely things that you can do. And listening to police radio, going on ride-alongs and stuff like that can definitely help you to learn like lingo and things like that. Mm-hmm. And now I think a lot of departments are going towards plain language, but there are so many guys that have been on for a while that don't completely speak in plain language that you have to learn those 10 codes anyway in order, because they still use a lot of them.
Yeah. I never learned 10 codes. We used the plain English, which was kind of, because I would talk to cops from other agencies and they go, what do you say? What do you say when this happens? Because we say 10 something. And I go, oh yeah, we just say, send me an ambulance.
Yeah.
Oh, then that's the plain English.
Oh, yeah.
And one thing that you brought up was really important, because I think studying the streets and the areas is important too, because it's good if you know the area that and I've heard some pre-academy, I mean pre-graduating, you know.
pre-academy going,
people that were they're not quite graduated yet,
right? Mm-hmm.
They're going to graduate soon. Anyways, they get their assignment to whatever division they're going to go to, and then they just drive around, kind of check out the area, the streets. because it's crucial that even though you're there on the first day in patrol, they're not going to care if you don't know where you're at.
Yeah.
If a help call comes out, if
Yeah.
your partner gets shot and you don't know where you're at, they're not going to care that, oh, I'm new. It's my first day. They're not going to care.
Oh, one of the worst things was at night. The city that I worked in was very dark, like hardly any street lights. And that was one of the most frustrating things. Like there were a couple times where like it was every cell within my body. It took me to not just like completely road rage, lose it and like slam the steering wheel because not only are you frustrated learning all these new things, you've got somebody sitting in the passenger seat with you, observing you, scrutinizing you, and pointing out all the things that you're already probably aware of, and then some. Yeah. And so that was the most frustrating thing, was passing by a street sign in the dark and then them being like, where are you? And you're like, I don't know.
Because they knew that street sign wasn't readable.
Right. So I started to get in the habit of like, look every time I turned, looking at the street that I was going down. Because what happens if like there's nothing worse than like when the domestic violence call comes out and you're having to run code and you don't know where you're supposed to be going.
Yeah.
Like it's awful. And like you'll get lucky a couple times, but there'll be the time that you don't, and you'll have to make a U-turn and look like a jackass. And yeah, and then not even that, but you have to worry about like you said, the bigger consequences of what happens if you're not there. Or going to the wrong house. You hear news stories about that like recently. Yeah. And so that's one thing as a civilian or as a person myself, I'm like, how I always stress to people how important it is to make sure that the numbers on your house are visible. If you want it to be easy for somebody to find you, make sure the numbers on your house are visible.
Mm-hmm. I think some good advice. You brought up something to grab the street names. A couple things is it doesn't matter if you're going to a call or you're just driving, tootling around because you don't have anything in queue for any calls. So you're driving southbound on Western.
Mindlessly.
Remember that I'm right now be always conscious of where you are. I'm southbound Western. And then when you turn, I'm turning eastbound on 5th Street. And then, at the same time, what's the block number you're on? I'm on the 2500 block of 5th Street, just east of Western. Yeah. You always want to have, because if you turn the corner, you go down a few houses and someone starts shooting at you, you don't have time to go, partner, what's the number on the house? You don't have time for that, but you do know that you are east of Western on 5th.
Right.
You know, and you also need to know that if something goes down and there's a situation where you don't want officers to come in the opposite direction, tell officers do not come in off of this street coming
the north
opposite.
Side. Yeah.
So being knowledgeable about where you are, and it's not that, I studied this map and all this kind of stuff. It's not like that. It's like knowing where you are every single second in that police car. So, but so let's. I want to know some of the things you liked about being a city cop.
So the thing that I liked the most, well, God, once you get used to it, I think that one of the cool things is having the camaraderie with your like squad. Once you kind of get on and get to know them, the coolest thing is once you start to get the hang of things and starting to feel like it takes probably years before you start to really get comfortable knowing before that pit in your stomach, like when you're on your way to a call, like, okay, what do I need to do? Like you start running through your head, like, what can I do in this situation with the information you have? It takes years. And so I feel like that exposure is crucial. So getting that with as uncomfortable as it is or could be sometimes, it was satisfying to be like, okay, that's one more thing that I've learned. I don't know. I think a lot of people kind of like I guess the cliche would be like, helping people. Like it feels good to be able to show up and assist somebody with what they need help with, whether it's them being lost or, a domestic violence situation, doing what you can to be there in a bad situation and not, give them a good experience in the way that you have control over. Things like that were cool. I think just I don't know, like the rush, like the first time you get to I think I talked to you right after the first time. For me, it was like weird. I was on FTO still. And there was it was at the Circle K, it was at a Circle K, and there was a person on drugs that was kind of just like you heard it come out over the radio that they were, DC subject, which is like, okay, we need to get there fast because this guy's alone. So combative. And we get there, and I was there with my FTO, and without even thinking, I was like, you think that you don't know how you're going to react in that situation, but in that situation, like he was on the ground, and luckily the guy that had gotten there was pretty good with like jujitsu. And so he was probably the best one for it to have happened to, but he was on the ground wrestling with this guy. And when we got there, like just like in the academy, they tell you to like cross their ankles and fold them at the knees and then sit on them, like just sit on their legs so they can't hurt themselves or kick somebody else or whatever, just to stabilize them. And so I got in there and did that, and stuff like that is just satisfying to be able to, I mean, I don't know, put a stop to things getting worse. And I think the big takeaway from that for me was like little by little, starting like with all this frustration and all the stuff that you feel like, oh, I'm here and I have this much to learn. Like one step by step, kind of getting that exposure and getting used to things. And it was just fun. I mean, like that's why people get into police work, for a lot of the fun stuff. It is fun, like the rush. And obviously it doesn't happen as often as you would like for it to, or always under the circumstances that you would expect or hope for. But gosh, and it sucks. Like, don't get, like, if you're in the report writing room and you're working on this report and you're at a good spot, you're not at a good stopping point at all, but you're getting close to being finished. And then you hear a call come out, and there's just like, no, there's nothing. You put your vest on if you've taken it off, and you go. Like you're out. So things like that, the adrenaline rushes and stuff like that are cool, and being able to learn things and finally feel that satisfaction or the self-sufficiency that you start to recognize over time. I feel a little bit more confident going to these types of calls, but gosh, it's such a long learning curve, and nothing will affirm that better than being in that position and recognizing that from firsthand experience. But yeah, like the streets definitely was very frustrating for me. Because I was in a city that wasn't necessarily super familiar to me. So that's a huge one. Always knowing where you're at, because it's exhausting. You're inundated with all this information. And the one time you feel like you're driving and you can kind of take a minute to breathe, because there's not a lot coming through on the radio. There's not a lot going on. And so you're just kind of mindlessly, trying to relax and have a conversation to unwind, like with your FTO. And then either something comes out or they hit you with something that they're like, oh, well, where are you? And you're like, God dang it. Like for one moment, you're just like but it's normal. So I mean, definitely you don't want to beat yourself up too hard about it when that does happen, because that's what it's for, is them giving you that wake up call. But yeah, for 1 second, you'll kind of relax and try to like just unwind mentally for a minute. And then you're just driving mindlessly and you don't know where the hell you're at. Yeah, so I think it's a challenge, and I think that was one of the main things. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but one of the things I looked forward to is like, the experience and the challenge that you can kind of rise to the occasion. That was always satisfying. And I think it's always hard to articulate all the things you enjoy about it. But those were some of the things that come to mind off the top of my head, I think.
Was there a moment, not that there isn't now, but was there a moment of pride when you first put that? It's different when you're in the academy and you graduate in your uniform. Was there a moment of pride when the first time you jumped out of the police car and you're walking around in your uniform and go, this is pretty cool. I'm a police officer.
I think there definitely was a moment of that, but for me specifically, just because of my personality, I think it was definitely overshadowed by the feeling of like, oh shit, you know? Like just the fear of like, oh my gosh, like just the gravity of what you're doing and the fact that you're like here and the gravity of what you're doing is here, but you're doing it already. And so that was kind of like not scary, I wouldn't say, but just yeah, it's uncomfortable and kind of like holy crap, like hard to wrap your mind around. And so, but I think that's good is to be aware. It would be abnormal if you weren't a little bit nervous because
Yeah.
you have, I mean, I would be worried for people if they weren't a little bit nervous about the gravity of what they were taking on. But yeah, I think a little bit, but there's definitely that letdown in a good, like letdown of emotions, I guess, the first day that you're off FTO because you're just kind of like a deep breath of fresh air where you're kind of like, holy cow, like I can be on my own now. Like it's exhausting to feel like to be stuck with anybody in a vehicle for 10 plus hours a day. And when I started out, we were working like a 14, a 13, and a 12. That was our first week. And so like being stuck with somebody in a vehicle for that long every single day, and you are the object of their scrutiny, that is exhausting. And so when you're out of that phase and you're done, you're super relieved and you feel accomplished and proud of yourself. But at the same time, you're kind of like, holy shit, I'm by myself now. So I don't have somebody immediately there to kind of bounce ideas off of or to catch me if I screw up. But in a way, it's scary, but in a way, you become more self-reliant because you know that you're the only fail-safe you have, that you become more confident because you have to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just it's definitely a weird sensation. And just going through it, I feel like you grow as a person for sure and for the better. Like no matter what, whether you stick with it or not, it's a good experience to just have.
Yeah, I remember when I first started in the police car and I was in my little uniform and I was clean shaven and I was 22 years old and I was just so cute. And I would go to calls and I would be like, this is so cute. You know, I'm like doing a police call. And then 17 years later, when I did my last tour and patrol in 1997, I was like, the calls would come out of the radio. See the man, neighbor dispute. Oh gosh. Okay, what do you want? What's going on? You know, by the time I'm like, it was all so new. And then once you have the same calls over and over, and these people can't adult, it would make me crazy.
Oh, like when you show up to some calls, you wonder how these people are surviving in the same reality that you are. Is the best way I can understand. The best way I could maybe explain it to somebody is you get back in your car and you sit there and think to yourself, like, how in the hell are you living in the same world that I am? And life is as hard for me as it is. I can't believe
Yeah.
I can't put two and two together how these people have made it this far in life.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing because when you first get there, it's new and it's exciting, but then when you finally realize these people are calling the police, and this is not really my job. I can't really help you. Your neighbor,
but it is your job, and you signed up for it.
Job. You know, I was talking to Steve in the podcast before. Steve Gould, you guys, Things Policey podcast. Steve Gould, and you and I have both been on that podcast. Steve's a kick. You know, he's doing amazing things out there. And plus, oh my goodness, he's got some graphics, and you know who's designing his graphics too. Anyways, I
do.
So Steve was talking one time, and Steve works in a little town in Massachusetts, and his closest backup is 30 minutes away. And when he goes home, they close up shop, and the state patrol takes over patrol in his area. I mean, this is like rural area. And yet he talks about one time he was at a stoplight and somebody come up next to him and flips him off and MFs him. I'm like, this is in the middle of nowhere. What are you guys doing?
How do you not laugh at that though?
I don't.
Like,
Gosh. So my question to you is, there's a newness of police work, but did you have these people that you just sensed the hate that they just didn't like you because you wore a uniform?
oh, for sure. And for like a few more factors beyond that, because of the area where I was at, there's like I think the area that I'm at and also was blessed in a way because of the overwhelming support that the majority of the public, their outlook towards police officers, I think is lucky. But in the area where I was, there's an element of like cultural, there's an element of like female, race. So I think I had a lot of those things maybe working against me in some ways. And I definitely felt that to some degree, but I was like branded not necessarily in a negative way, but as like the one that was like too nice to people, because I treated people like human beings. Like you treat them with respect, and then if they're a jerk, then that's the point that you're just kind of like, all right, screw off. But I think like I would wave at everybody. 9 times out of 10 people wouldn't wave back, but it's not because I don't think it's because they hated me. I think it's because they were so used to not being waved at that they're kind of like caught off guard. Like, why the hell are the cops waving at me? Because I don't know. I always grew up with the mentality towards like police. Like, you don't have to know them to wave at them. They're the police. You do know them. Like, hey, like how's it go? Like police wave at the garbage man. Police wave at the school bus drivers. Like, I don't know you personally, but we know each other because of the nature of the work that we do. And so I think that was always funny because I didn't necessarily feel a super negative stigma towards people that hated me, but I definitely felt it from some people for sure, for various reasons.
When I was a kid, I used to wave at cops all the time.
For sure.
It was the LA County sheriffs when I was growing up, and I'd wave at them, and they'd wave back. Yeah. But that was a different time. That was in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, when, oh my gosh, it's a cop, so cool, hi cop, or whatever. But
it's the police.
Yeah, and now it's you're more likely to get someone flip you the bird than a wave. Yeah.
I think I've been lucky in the sense that has not been my experience in large part. But yeah, there's definitely times where I would wave at people and they would like give you like a death stare and not wave back.
Yeah.
But
and it's different now because all you have to do is go to TikTok or whatever, and they tell people, yeah, you can just flip off the cops and they can't do anything to you, and they're gonna so they go, okay, and they run with that or whatever. And so you have to be really thick-skinned and not even take people seriously. But my opinion, I mean, if people were to do that to me, I'd be like, you're so dumb.
Like, how do you not laugh at it? Like, I hope you feel better. Have a good day.
Does it make you feel better now? What didn't you like about street police or being a city cop?
You know what? I don't think there were a few things that I didn't like about the job itself, but I think there's definitely things that come with the job, like issues with, I don't know, everywhere has their issues with the people you work with or wherever you're, like any job. I think things like that, or just some of like the petty type stuff that you feel like you don't agree with. The politics, of course, are always a little bit exhausting, and no matter what job you do. But I think majority of it, I had a difficult time because of a language barrier. It was probably, I want to say 4 or 5 females where I was at. And the language barrier was difficult, not even just with the public, because it was difficult, but it was also kind of an opportunity for me to learn. And so I learned a lot of the language while I was on duty, and that was cool. Like I could get through traffic stops and learned enough to be able to get by. But that was the crappy thing for me, is I'm so talkative and outgoing that it was hard because I didn't want to just get by. You want to feel like you're doing a good job and make sure that people understand you and things like that. So that really kind of chewed on me for a little bit. And then being able to communicate with your coworkers, because a lot of times they had a preference about what language they would like to speak in. And, you know, I obviously was not fluent in that language. That kind of sucked. Not so much to feel left out, but just to kind of not know what was going on sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that. The schedule that I was on was ideally, the idea was for us to have every other weekend off, which in theory is great. In my mind, I had to commute for, you know, not terrible commute, but it was a sizable enough commute that it was kind of tiresome, and a lot of gas money at the same time that gas
Mm-hmm.
prices went up.
Yeah.
So when I was driving to work every day, instead of driving to the department that was probably within a mile of my house, turning one way, I turned the other way to drive 40 minutes the other direction to another city that I was not familiar with, and had a lot more just like challenges in working there. And so I'm thankful for having had that opportunity, because I feel like I learned from it and I'm proud of myself for having gone through that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was difficult. And so a big thing was the schedule, like was working 14-hour long days if you got out on time. Plus, so let's say you got off 2 hours late, which was not uncommon. And then you had stack on like another hour and a half there and back cumulatively throughout the day. So you were working like 18-hour long days, 17, 18-hour long days. So no time for the gym. By the time I'd get home, shower, and eat, I was getting like 4 hours of sleep a night. And that is not the way to live any, you know, just being sleep deprived. This is definitely not the profession you need. You need that also stacked against you. And so that was something that wore on me. So some of the things like the commute, the schedule, my dad passed away while I was an FTO, so that kind of threw a little bit of a wrench in things and made things difficult. And then made it through and had the idea to stick it out and really stay there for a long time. But then the language barrier was also a difficulty. It wasn't a deal breaker for me, but was a difficulty on top of the commute and the schedule. And then another opening came up that was closer to home, and it was closer to home. It was more pay, which kind of was a no-brainer. And it kind of just felt like I needed a change from where I was at, because I was kind of, I don't know, struggling with some things. So those were some of the things, mainly just, I don't know, like the little frustrations and headaches with things that you would deal with in any job. But, you know, all that stuff on top of it, the long hours, the commute, having, you know, and then I had my days off. So if you got called in on your day off for a training or to go to court, that would get canceled or continued. So I was driving back and forth for those on my days off. And so really the days that you were supposed to get off because you were working those longer hours didn't always turn out to be days off. So then you were just working super long hours almost, and then working every day. So that was difficult to schedule, and the hours were rough. And then the commute starts to wear on you, the language barrier, all of that. And then this other job opened. I never had the idea that was something I was going to shoot for. But at the time where I was at, I was like, I'll just go for it and see what happens. Went for it and found out that the pay was better there. So I'm kind of like, well, it's a no-brainer. So I went. Those were some of the things that I disliked about it, where I was at, that just made it difficult, if that answers the question. But as far as the job, I mean, any job you're going to have is going to have those frustrations and those difficulties, whether it be with people you work with or the environment you're working in. But yeah, again, with the time in law enforcement, there's all that stacked on top of it. So
yeah. So you're talking about some mental health stuff where you, mental health, it's mental wellness.
Yeah, for sure.
And
It was
emotional
impacting
wellness.
my life. Yeah.
Yeah. You just weren't happy.
No.
You know, and it's not that I don't hear you saying, oh, they were just mean, they were rude, I didn't like the people there, or anything like that. It was that for you, you were not happy, and that
It was
wears
just
on
not,
you.
it just was not the best fit.
Yeah. And realistically, I just want everybody to know that there's nothing wrong with that. It's with any job, and you have to realize that police work is a little different in the nuts and bolts of what you're doing, but realistically, it's a job.
Yeah.
And if any other job that you're at and you go, I don't like this anymore, you quit.
Yeah.
You go somewhere else. You get another job somewhere else.
And that's the hard thing too, is because you love the career, but it's also different based upon where you're doing it. And
Yeah.
so you love that career and like the idea of what you can do and stuff like that. But it's, stuff like that. Definitely you have to weigh those. Like for me, I'm like, no matter what job you love, I mean, if that's adding an extra limit of liability for me. If I'm getting 4 hours of sleep at night, I was struggling to stay awake on my way to and from work.
And I've talked to a ton of cops, and they're just like, and it's very common in 2022, 2023, where there's not enough cops. And we did an interview with an officer who went from a sheriff's department to a local police department because he was tired. And he specifically said, I got tired of working my 8-hour shift and then them tacking another 8 hours and saying you have to do a double. And he got tired of it because there weren't enough people to cover an 8-hour shift.
And it's not even mentally like frustration tired. You are exhausted. And
Yeah.
that is not that's the last profession. You need that stacked against you on top of all the other things.
Yeah. So quality of life is important. And
Mhm.
I don't want anybody who listens to this podcast to think that they have to, I got to do it. No, man. If you are physically tired and emotionally spent because your brain can't function, then hey, find a job. Maybe there's one closer
Right.
to home. Maybe there's one where they actually are fully, the manpower is where it's supposed to be, where everybody gets their days off and stuff. Canceling days off, and I don't think people realize just because you have a day off doesn't mean you don't have to go to court.
Yeah.
And or you have training that you have to go to, and it can really wreck your life if it's not a good fit. And so
Right.
that's important. We're going to take a quick break.
Cool.
And then we come back. I want to hear some war stories. Some war stories of Christine doing some police work. So we'll come right back.
PoliceBackground.net is the premier background investigation prep site. With veteran investigator Ken Roybal, who spent 16 years conducting over 1,400 LAPD backgrounds. For more information, go to PoliceBackground.net.
Can't believe I spent that much time doing backgrounds. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is a really long time.
I got stories though.
Yep.
I want to hear some war stories.
We'll share some of Ken's war stories at the end of the podcast.
If I could remember them, I might. There's some things that's all, backgrounds is confidential, but boy, oh boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
Boy, oh boy. I got stories, man.
Anybody that's done anything for that long has stories.
Let's talk about war stories. I mean, you have some adventures that I want to hear about.
Oh man. Was that a dog in your background? Maybe your
that's
chair.
my chair squeaking.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Some WD-40. I was all, what is happening to that dog? Oh man, I remember my first week. It was definitely my first phase, and it might have been my first or second week on the job. When you I kind of said this, so for the first few days, you're sitting in the passenger seat. So it might have been the first few days on my FTO. I was sitting in the passenger seat while my FTO was driving, and there was a stolen vehicle that came out. And so I was like, all right, sweet. It's going to be cool. And I was like, this is going to be a cool idea. I can witness it from the passenger seat and kind of see how they do things or whatever. And so we got into this pursuit, and it ended up in a trailer park where a guy had dumped the vehicle and jumped out of it and gone off on foot. And I think there was two or three people in the vehicle with him. When we got there was a female that they had me search, and then found some junk on her. And then we were searching for the other guy, I guess, that was driving it. Gosh, I'm trying to remember. And so we got him in handcuffs and went and did the not so fun part, trying to gather surveillance footage and all what happened or whatever. But it was we had recovered the vehicle, but it was in the middle of the day on Sunday at like 2 p.m. So technically this pursuit should have been called off because it wasn't really like, you know, it was probably like the threat to the public was probably of the pursuit probably outweighed, you know, the crime that was happening. But anyway, everybody was fine, thankfully. But we caught the guy. Long story short, I ended up like getting red Garrity that week because then there was like an investigation as to why this vehicle pursuit didn't get called off. So that was interesting. My first few days on the job was, you know, the stolen vehicle pursuit, and then getting to process and book that guy. So that was a good experience. But the funny part about that was when I was searching him in the holding cell, I realized he had women's pants on.
Oh.
And yeah, and so I was like, man, I mean, these for women's pants, they, you know, he's pulling them off pretty good, but they weren't like super skinny jeans or whatever, but they were like women's pants that were probably a few sizes too big for him. So they worked. But it made me laugh because he was pretty compliant and was like friendly enough that I didn't throw it in his face. I was like, I'm just going to hold on to that for me. But I realized he was wearing women's pants because I read the tag on them as I was searching him. And it was like Gloria Vanderbilt jeans. And I knew that they were women's pants because my mom has a pair of those from Kohl's. And so I went home and I told my mom, I was like, this guy had your pants on. But it was kind of actually sad because obviously a lot of these people have a rough past. And so I remember on the way back to the police station after all of this, he was sitting in the back and he was like, how do you guys do it? And we were like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? How do we do what? And he was like hold down a job and just, so it's kind of sad. I mean, you come into contact with people that just like, you know, were born into maybe a rough household. They were not dealt the same cards as some other. So things like that, dealing with people can be positive, negative, and just interesting, like stuff that, you know, how do you do it? Like he just wasn't, there was never a good example set for him. And that was just his life. But, yeah, he was fairly compliant. I just remember he had women's pants on, and that was funny to me. And then it was just kind of wild to, there was an investigation. So that was kind of my first, just kind of like, oh yeah, here's the fun part. But then I also got the interesting side of like, well, you kind of have to watch your ass too, because there's the liability part too. So,
what was it like? Now, why were you chasing the car?
Because it had come up stolen. Like the license plate had popped off as a stolen vehicle. And so another officer had called out a pursuit. And so we jumped in to go help him, and it never got called off, you know, like it probably should have been.
So it wasn't your pursuit initially. It was another unit's pursuit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But you got to be in the pursuit.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Was that fun?
It was fun. Yeah. Except for I wasn't driving. So I was just kind of in the passenger seat. So but yeah, that was my first exposure to it. And then I was telling you about the, I don't even know if I finished the story about the Circle K guy.
No.
Oh, that we got the same thing. He had, the other officer a different officer had called out for, you know, backup. We got involved, and then, this individual was on drugs and was, you know, so we called medics out, and he ended up being transported. And so my FTO rode with the guy in the ambulance, and I had to run code for 30 minutes straight from from following the ambulance behind him. So my first experience, probably a couple weeks into my field training, driving code was for 30 minutes following an ambulance.
You're talking about code three.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
With lights and sirens from one city to the next where the closest hospital was.
The closest hospital is 30 minutes away?
Yes.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my first experience. And so it was just kind of funny because it was like you were running code lights and sirens, but it was like funny because I was like turning the radio up and just kind of cruising because I was just following the ambulance at that point. So that was just interesting, just funny stuff.
Driving code 3s, it's interesting because you can be You could just be minding your own business. All of a sudden, the dispatch comes out and says, handle the call code 3. And all of a sudden, your adrenaline just goes through and it goes through the roof of the car and it touches the
Yeah.
moon. It's just this rush.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, it's sometimes they won't tell you. Like you have to decipher for yourself. Is this a response that warrants a code 3? And so I think when you have to do that, it shoots your adrenaline through the roof, but it also scares the crap out of you because you're kind of like, am I making the right call?
Yeah.
am I like living vicariously through this like opportunity to drive with my lights and sirens on?
Yeah,
So there was
interesting.
the first time I was driving was we were leaving the station and a domestic violence call had come out at like it was within a couple miles away, but we had gotten there and it was like a son or a grandson, I think, who was living with his grandmother at the time and was reported like being violent and breaking things inside the house. She was scared and he was on drugs. And so a few of us showed up, got there at the same time, went inside the house, and he had locked himself in the bathroom. So we were in there trying to talk to the grandmother. And when he came out, all of us were kind of like, whoa, like he's probably, like, he was high as a kite, you could tell. But we got him out in the front yard and had gotten him handcuffed, and we were touching him. All of us had gloves on because he was just soaking wet. I was like, man, this guy is sweaty as all hell. So sweaty. And then it was a relief later because everybody was just, like you're grossed out because you're just kind of like, oh, this guy's messed up, but he's just like covered in sweat, slippery, like no shirt on, just gym shorts. And turns out it was kind of a relief after the fact because the grandma had said he had gone into the shower. So some of it was sweat, yes, from the drugs, but he had gone into the shower to like hose himself off with cold water before we got there. And so I was like, geez, I wish I had known that because he was like slippery. Like it was hard to get a grip on him. And so that was interesting, just and sad, And then I ended up the grandmother thankfully was fine, but yeah, you could just tell like that's her family, it's somebody she cares about, but he's clearly on drugs and having a rough time. So stuff like that, it's definitely this crap that you deal with can be hard, but the stuff that it's interesting, but it's also sad, because you see both sides of it, like this kid having a rough time and this grandma who loves him and doesn't want to see him going through this. It definitely, it's interesting. And then go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and then did you have any other war stories or did you?
I mean, there was tons of like little things. I think I guess as far as still like a first stolen vehicle pursuit that we were on, somebody had reported this vehicle stolen, and we were out there it was my FTO and I on third phase, and we were out there by ourselves. And so we had requested backup from the neighboring sheriff's office. And they were going to be a while out. And so we had followed this vehicle out into like the middle of like BFE. And the guy, by the time we had pulled off to the side, the guy had like ditched the vehicle and tried to make it look like he was just walking along the side of the road. And clearly it was him. And so, but we still had to clear the vehicle. And so we cleared the vehicle. There was nothing in there, made contact with the guy. And you could tell that the guy was fine completely, but it was just weird. Like the level of awkward or weird lengths that people are willing to go to. Because when we were questioning it, he was talking fine. But then when we went to question him, he literally sat there. And as I was trying to get anything out of him, just gave me nothing but just weird grunting noises. Like to the point where you were just kind of like, is there something wrong with you legitimately? Or are you just, but that's what he was just doing. Like literally just,
So
and I was like, seriously, like it was just uncomfortable because you're kind of like, well, I'm clearly not going to get anything out of you. But yeah, so I just random stuff like that. As far as war stories, I mean, like, yeah, going to domestic violence calls, but I don't know, it's crazy how much the details slip by you, I guess.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that during my time there, because I was there for 6 months before lateraling.
Mm-hmm.
I would say there was definitely a couple of crazy DVs, but most of it just awkward, like odd. Yeah, just I
Because
don't know.
people invite you into their lives, into their homes for the most intimate moments.
Yes,
When you're the
yes,
police, there's some you get to see the underside of society that people really don't see.
yes,
Um, but now you decided at one point you decided that this is we already talked about it how this was really getting to be overwhelming to you,
yeah.
and so you were 6 months
Six or
into the
7 months.
job
Yeah. Hmm.
and decided I this is killing me, man.
Yeah.
And you decided that I'm going to lateral, and this job came up at a campus
Yep.
PD,
Hmm.
and you put your paperwork in, and they decided to hire
Yep.
you.
Yep. And so I applied, I want to say in August or September, and started in October. And I've been there ever since. So it's definitely, so that's kind of, we talked about what made me lateral. It was just kind of a better fit. And I never really pictured myself going that way, but I'm just kind of like, well, everything happens for a reason. And even if this is temporary, then so be it. And that was kind of the understanding, you know? Um, and it was something that was just kind of, you know, a good fit in the meantime that would allow me to continue doing, you know, continue doing this job without having to feel like I had stepped away from it and either get back in or just, you know, let my certification expire.
Mm-hmm. And
Um,
you knew the people. You knew this job before. You knew the people at this job because you had worked there before.
yes. So the same college, but in a, like a vastly different role.
Uh,
Um, so was familiar with these people. Yeah. And so I think that helped me out too, because I was familiar with the campus and a lot of the people and things like that. Um, so that's kind of what made me lateral. And then it just kind of ended up working out. Um, it's the schedule's definitely better, 4 10s. Um, and it's definitely different though. Like you're still like fully sworn police officer, but you're almost like a built-in SRO a little bit, which is
mm-hmm.
kind of nice. Um, it's a smaller department. Um, and like really it's a good gig. I have no complaints, but it is limiting, you know, being a new officer going to a smaller department like that, you're not going to get as quickly or as much exposure and experience doing things. So we still will handle like um, the calls are similar, I guess. In a look, we have a lot less DVs and things, obviously, like that, and few and far between. But we still will handle like help out neighboring agencies in the area. There was a call that came out recently that one of the sheriff's office, that one of the deputies was like probably 30 minutes out. So they called us and asked if we could assist them on. And I got there like 10 minutes before they did. So things like that, it's definitely different because it's a little bit slower, which is good and bad, limiting in that sense, but definitely cool because you can still get involved with things, but you don't necessarily have to. So you can kind of be as proactive as you want to be. So that's kind of the fun part about it. And not all of your interactions with people are negative.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we'll like, I'll go out and like jumpstart students' cars or help them change their tires or yeah,
Oh.
help them when they lock themselves out of their vehicle, things like that. So you kind of get to be like a built-in school resource officer, and a lot of that stuff, it's more of like
Mm-hmm.
a community aspect more so than like a city cop would be. But you do definitely have some, like one of the calls a couple months after I started was a local school, and it came out over the radio as an active shooter. And so we went over there with the idea that that's what it was. Turns out that it was not an active shooter like it had come out. It was a shooting incident that happened in the parking lot between a couple students. Um, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. Like that will get your blood pumping, but it's kind of just like once when that comes out, it's like you're not even thinking about it in that way. You're just kind of like, okay, well, we just need to go. And so that was kind of crazy because that stuff doesn't happen very often. And then a couple months
Mm-hmm.
after that, there was some guy that was high on some stuff, had stolen like a commercial vehicle um, within the county. And when it was reported stolen, it was, you know, he had been seen, but again, the pursuit had been called off because it was midday. So this guy had been like joyriding around for hours, and then between different cities within the county, and then came in, and there was like a multi-agency pursuit of people involved. He ended up coming to the campus and hijacked a woman from her vehicle at gunpoint on campus. Funny story is I was supposed to be on that day and wasn't because my coworker wanted to have Saturday off. So I was like, yeah, I'll switch with you. I'll work your Saturday for you. And so he had my shift, and that's what happened that day. And so it's just kind of like, yeah, the calls, the hot calls, I guess, are fewer and farther between, but they can still happen. So it's kind of nice that you're still doing that job, but it's maybe a little bit more low key. So that's, I would say the major difference is a little bit slower. You're a little bit more limited in your opportunities that are open to you because it's a smaller department, obviously the budget and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely not been a bad gig at all. You'll have your days where it's busy and other days that are a little bit slower. And definitely different kinds of calls here and there, and not as much of the crazy stuff as you might like to see a little bit more, but it's kind of nice too. So yeah, it's definitely different.
Do the officers there kind of go, "Oh, woohoo, you're a city cop," and or do
most of the guys there, with exception of a couple who were prior military, were in law enforcement previous to their employment here. So like we have a couple of the higher ups. This is like they retired and have come back in this role. And then several of the other officers have lateraled over from other agencies. So they've worked elsewhere prior to working here, which is good because they have that exposure. So no, I wouldn't say, and I, got on working there with, not very much time under my belt. So it was good. And I'm grateful for having had that experience elsewhere prior to coming to the college, because you kind of see both sides of it. But yeah, it's definitely a different environment, I would say, for sure. It's more of a community thing because it's more, I guess you're more proprietary over a small area, and there's less people on it at a given time than there would be in a regular city police department. So
there was one thing I wanted to ask you about. There's a YouTube video out. It's been out for a few years, and I can't think if it was Phoenix or one of the big cities in Arizona. And it's these campus police that stopped a city councilman from that area. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And the city councilman
sounds familiar.
He's an activist. He's an anti-police activist. And so they stop him for something. It was legit. And they stop him, and he's going, well, I'm on the city streets. Do you have a right to stop me? This is illegal? And they're going, no, I'm a peace officer. I'm a state certified peace officer. That means
right
in the state, I can do police work in the state. And he's all giving him a hard time and stuff like that. Is that the same for you? Do campus police, are they stuck to the borders of the campus, or is it they can go off campus?
Well, so the thing, no, yes and no, because the main thing is being on, like, there's less people on at a given time. So your primary responsibility is campus. So you don't want to stray so far away that if something came out on campus that you're so far that you couldn't get there. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're not stuck or sequestered to that part of campus, or to just campus, especially like if it's nights and weekends and the campus is closed. You have a little bit more freedom to roam because there's not a ton of activity. But yeah, you definitely want to stay close enough to the campus that you'd be able to get back in the event that something happened. But yeah, lucky for us in the area that I'm in, most people are pretty supportive of law enforcement. So there's not a ton of that, but in surrounding areas, yeah, you'll get people that will be like, do you know who I am? And it's like, either yes, I know who you are, and it doesn't matter, or no, I don't know who you are, and you're going to get treated like everybody else either way, whether I know who you are or don't.
Yeah.
but yeah, there's definitely some of that difficulty, because I think some people have the mentality that like, oh well, you're campus PD, you can't pull me over out here. And it's like, oh well, actually we're state certified law enforcement officers, and we're able to do the same, we have the same authorities and rights given to us as any other officer. And so I think there's a lot of times that misconception. Maybe I haven't run into a lot of like rude people or anybody that's really even thrown that in my face, but I know it has happened before, where people will kind of question it. They'll try to push the envelope and be like, oh well, you can't really do that, can you? And you're like, oh but we can.
I think
um
that's a misconception that they think that because because um campus police, there's so many different types. There's campus police, which are post certified.
right.
What's the other one? Public safety, that are security, right? On some
Yes,
campuses.
we
And so I
have
think they
we have
confuse it.
we have unarmed security guards on campus that work the dorms a lot of the time for us.
Hmm.
So I think that helps differentiate. There's like a clear difference between the two. Most everybody at our campus is well aware of the fact that there's like fully sworn police officers and security guards. Like I know at U of A, they have U of A and ASU, NAU, they've got tons of different, they've got like their state certified police officers. They also have like post certified officers that work at the campus. So they're two different departments.
Hmm.
So anything that happens on campus um, is, the campus police departments, but they work in conjunction with the city police officers, which would be similar to what we do. But that would be hard, because I know that they've got several different campuses. So like satellite campuses are usually manned by like I would guess a city police department, whoever's closest, and then they would work in conjunction with that campus police department. So yeah, I think that sometimes there's that misconception, but I thankfully haven't had to deal with it a bunch, but it is kind of funny, I guess, if somebody did, they're like, try to give you lip and be like, oh, well, you don't have a right to pull me over. It's like, well, you don't have the right to blow a stop sign here.
This
So
I encourage everybody listening to YouTube that Arizona campus police pull over or something like that. But this officer did such a good job, and the guy was trying to be a little jerk about it, and it went on. And the guy goes, yes sir, yes sir, with it, and this is the reason we stopped you, and yes sir, and I'm going like, this is ridiculous. And then afterwards, the city councilman makes a personnel complaint against them for.
oh,
It's
I know.
totally,
Yeah, I know exactly which video you're talking about now. Yeah.
I don't
But
even,
I
I don't
don't,
live.
was it a campus officer, or was it a city
No, it's campus police.
campus? How
Campus
funny.
police, and
Yeah,
that
so
was his big thing.
there's sometimes that you'll kind of wonder if people think that, because like they'll do some like stupid things on the road in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of like, I wonder if they realize that they can get pulled over for that. But
Yeah, I remember sometimes, I don't know why people thought this, but you go in pursuit or whatever, and they pull into their driveway and they go, I'm on my personal private property. You can't do anything. I'm on private property. And I'm like, yeah, so turn around. You're under arrest. And I think that people would say, okay, now I'm off campus. You can't chase me now. You can't do anything to me. And unfortunately, that I'm going to burst your bubble. Okay.
they got disconnected and then connected again. So yeah, sometimes, and then you'll have to remind people, well, the violation we saw was on campus, or so you'll have to articulate that, like, well, no, actually we saw you run this stop sign, or we saw you speeding here, but it doesn't matter anyway,
Yeah.
because you know
I think they get surprised about it, but
yeah.
so I think we've covered mostly everything, all my questions that I had for you. I had many, many questions for you, but I think in closing, I kind of get the sense that, in the past, when you and I first started, it was really about you. Everybody's going to be a cop. Everybody's going to be a cop. And then 2020 happened, and things kind of took a turn where maybe I don't want to be a city cop anymore, because there's a lot of people, and I hear people tell me this, where they go, because on my Instagram, I'll post things that happen in police work, and it's not always the best. There's not a lot of super positive videos or stories that I post because there aren't a
Yeah.
lot. And then I've had people tell me, you know what? Just looking at what's going on, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I don't think I want to do this anymore. But I think that campus police is a really good alternative because the thing that you said about helping people and being of in the old time cops where they used to change the tires or they used to
Yeah.
wave or the kids would come up to you. That was so cool. So cool back in the day when I was growing up that the cops were our friends. And I
Yeah.
think that campus police might be a good alternative for people that want to do police work, but maybe don't want to put up with all the crap.
Right. Well, and there's times too where like it'll be funny, like you can grab a golf cart and give a kid a ride, or or like you'll be cruising by on the golf cart and the somebody in front of you will like give knuckles to the kid behind you, the kid you've never seen before on campus, but you ride by on the golf cart and you're like, you just hold your knuckles out and they're like, oh yeah, there you go. And so they'll do so things like that. And you're dealing with, I don't know, college students, which sometimes can think that they're too cool, but some of my favorite students are the coolest, like most interesting ones are the international students because
Mhm.
you have no idea what experiences they've had with law enforcement in their, in their life leading up to it. But those kids are usually pretty respectful, and they're always willing to kind of wave or smile at you, or say good morning, things like that. So kind of nice because you're dealing with and that's the thing too is I guess I wasn't this is not always something that I pictured myself doing going into it the way that I did, but I just kind of like try to believe like, well, everything happens for a reason. And I'm here now, and I think one of the cool things about doing it is it's a little, you have all the same stuff that you can do, but it's a little bit more calm in a more maybe a controlled environment to a degree, if that makes sense. But also you're dealing with students like right at that age where they're in college, so they're trying to do the right thing. So it's easier to give some students the benefit of the doubt because they're trying to, get an education and do something honest and do like, make an honest living for themselves, and improve themselves. They want to be there. And I think that that gives you a unique opportunity to be able to, I guess, when you interact with them in a way that can kind of like catch them before it's too late for some people, or
Mhm.
I don't know, kind of engage with them at that kind of a crucial age for a lot of
Yeah.
students.
When we met, you, me, and Steve, we were just every week. Was it every week we would meet up for Cops in the News? I think it was
I
every
think
week.
I think it was either every week or every other week. Yeah.
Yeah, and we would do Cops in the News, and you'd come on and you'd be on the podcast, and we would talk trash about the police stories that were going on. And back in the day, and we're talking what 3 years ago, something like that. Back in the day, Christine was all about being, I'm going to be a cop. I'm going to do, it's going to be and you were kind of a hardcore, I'm going to be a cop. And so you're the perfect person for me to ask this. So you went into police work, street police work, and now you're campus police.
Yeah.
So you've dealt in both worlds. What do you think is the perfect candidate for campus police as opposed to street police?
Geez, I don't know. Honestly, I know a lot of, well, just from the a few of the guys that I work with, it's a good job for like even people that have already worked a career and
Hmm.
like, want to retire because they're not ready to leave yet, but it's something that's a little bit more relaxed, maybe because it's a lower call volume on a
Hmm.
college campus. But also, I mean, I don't know. I mean, really for anybody, for people who have families, for people, who want more, more time with their kids. And honestly, it's kind of nice because working at the campus police department, you have a lot of the same benefits as a campus employee. So like your kids will get oftentimes education discounts on tuition or free, or you can take classes, things like that. There's a lot of benefits to it. It's close to home, and yeah, so honestly, I would say it's not a bad job for anybody. Like, it's not definitely not a bad gig. It's definitely different than what I had pictured for myself in a way, and,
Mhm.
but you can always still, I mean, get into stuff. Um, but yeah, you also have to, prioritize, like, they pay me to do this job, so I also have to be cognizant of that. It's definitely not a bad gig. I can't complain. It's not been bad to me at all. But yeah, I think it's definitely good for people who might have families or need more of a stable schedule. Um, I don't know. It's I mean, we still rotate. Like, when
Mhm.
there's still a every few months a rotating shift. So you're kind of working, but there's pros and cons to each shift. So if you're working days, there's more interaction with the students, the employees, probably more call volume coming out. If you're working nights and weekends, probably more traffic or, DUI stuff or crime stuff that you can get into because there's not a ton going on campus during the hours that it's closed.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of time, I don't know. It's not a bad gig. I feel like, yeah, it's definitely a little bit slower. And I, uh, I definitely got into it wanting to do the street police work, but there's been a lot of people that I've talked to recently, like Ken, especially from you. It's not the same as it used to be, for sure.
Mhm.
Not
Mhm.
even not even just societally or like the mentality that society has or the stigma that is with cops now, but just like the scrutiny and like, you know, you get into this job to want to do your job, but there's so many things like so much scrutiny even from within the department because of the political climate right now that it's like you can't even do your job. Like it's almost not even worth it to try to do your job because of all of the I guess what is the correct term for that? All of the
Um, s
fallout that could potentially happen afterwards and scrutiny.
yeah,
Yeah.
the scrutiny,
It,
yeah.
yeah, and just kind of having your hands tied. Like you carry a taser, but if it's frowned upon to use your taser, then what are you carrying it
Mhm.
for? You know?
Yeah, yeah.
So there's definitely pros and cons, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's still a job, and I'm a big proponent for like, yeah, do what you want to do, but at the same time, like your mental health is not going to be because you even if it's something you love and what you want to do, you're going to struggle finding joy in that if your mental
Mhm.
health is struggling or if you're just like, simply not getting enough sleep at night because that's not good either for you and then not really not safe.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think you made a good move. I think it was good for you,
yeah.
and, there's definitely people that will go into police work, and they get disenchanted.
Yep.
There's only so many times you can get flipped off in the street or people calling you names, and you never met them.
Yeah.
Where you may just want to slow it down a little bit because you still can help people, you can still
Yeah.
protect people, and I think more people like you than they do
Yep.
in some of the cities.
And that's the crappy thing is you can be the same person doing either job, but you have more of an opportunity for people to get to know you in order to like you
Yeah, and
working in a place like that.
one thing about campus police too, because there have been incidents with campus police officers where they've done something, where
Yeah.
the news media took, but I've never heard someone go, this campus police did this thing, and then go, all
Yeah.
campus police are bad. It doesn't
Yeah.
work like that with campus police. So,
What would be the acronym for that? It wouldn't be ACAB, it would be ACPAB.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I want to thank you for being here again. I can't
Heck
believe it.
yeah.
I talk to you all the time as much as possible. We text back and forth, and it's still a kick to find out what your adventures are. If you guys want to get a hold of Christine to find out about being campus police or anything like that, give me a holler. One thing I want to say. Oh, I'm in between two sentences. Send me an email, CanonPoliceBackground.net. I'll forward your information to Christine, and we'll get the answer for you. But the last thing I want to close on is in talking to you earlier, it looks like pay is pretty decent, benefits are pretty decent. A lot of times, campus police are attached to states,
Yep.
city police, and things, so they get pensions, medical
Yep.
benefits, all that. So it's really a good deal for you.
It's honestly not even that it's honestly not much different than
city or state departments. I mean, you really, like, you might have your state retirement system or the public safety retirement system, depending on what agency you go with. But yeah, it's really, I mean, as far as the benefits, it's still kind of the same job and fulfills the same purpose as giving you benefits and a reason to get up in the morning and a paycheck, and something similar enough to what you really went into it for, with maybe a little bit less of the stress.
Yeah. Well, I'm super happy for you. It seems like
Thanks.
you look very relaxed, very calm.
Thanks. I'm glad, because it's 95 degrees outside and I was sweating my ass off before this. So
While in Washington, it's going to be like 75, and so
jealous.
well, thank you a lot again, and you and I will
Thanks
be
for
in
having
contact. Yeah, and again, if you guys want to get a hold of Christine, let me know, and I'll forward your information to her. You can find out all about that. She's an awesome person. She's one of Steve and I's favorite people in the world. And,
Likewise.
so it's so cool. But we will be back in a couple weeks then.
Thanks for listening to the Police Applicant Podcast. We are the premier police background prep site in the U.S. and Canada. For more information on scheduling your police background consultation, go to policebackground.net. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes.